Hey guys, we'll get started shortly. Just going to give a few minutes for everybody to join. All right, let's go ahead and get started here. Well, let me add myself. There we go. Welcome, everybody. My name is Chris. Thanks for joining us today. I'm going to be your host for this webinar. I'm one of the co-founders of Massdriver, which, if you guys aren't familiar, Massdriver is a visual platform that allows you to package, distribute, deploy, and connect your IAC modules. This specific webinar is going to be focused on OpenTofu, but we support much more than just OpenTofu. Terraform, Helm, Bicep, and many of the popular IAC tools. So during this webinar, please don't hesitate to ask questions. We have people that are sitting in the webinar that can answer your questions, and I'll even try to answer them on air if possible. So please feel free to ask. Today, what we're going to be talking about is OpenTofu, and specifically how you can take an OpenTofu module, although this also works for Terraform, so it's Terraform or OpenTofu, but how you can take an existing OpenTofu module, assuming you have an existing IAC, and we're going to show you how you can easily import it into Massdriver, so you can use the Massdriver platform to package it, distribute it, deploy it. You're going to modify it, everything. So everything you kind of need to do in the life cycle of maintaining IAC. And so we'll go and get started, but first I'm going to send some links that will be useful. The first is going to be a GitHub repo. So that's the GitHub repo that we're going to be following along with. There's a bunch of material in there, as well as a README that kind of walks through what we're going to be doing here in case you're watching it offline or want to go on your own without the video. The second thing is obviously you're going to need OpenTofu to be doing this. There's an assumption here that you have OpenTofu. That link right there takes you to the OpenTofu docs around installing it onto your system. And then the last thing that you're going to need to be able to do some of the stuff in this webinar is the Massdriver CLI. So obviously you're going to need a Massdriver account as well, but you're going to need a Massdriver CLI. And that's a link to our GitHub repo where you can download and install it. And you guys will check out our docs site, which is docs or massdriver.cloud/docs. In fact, we'll get to that. Docs.massdriver.cloud. We'll get to that here in a little bit, but let me just link that right now. You can check out our docs, and there's information even in there around installing our CLI. Okay, let's get started. So let's talk about some of the things that we're going to go over today. First, we're going to take a very basic OpenTofu module, and we're going to convert it into a Massdriver bundle. Then we're going to publish that bundle into Massdriver, and we're going to deploy it. So you can see now what it looks like to deploy and manage IAC from within the Massdriver platform. Then we're going to take the scenario where perhaps you've already been managing your infrastructure with OpenTofu or Terraform, and you want to move it all over into Massdriver. And in order to do that, you need to move the state. And so we're going to show how you can migrate state from an existing deployed module into Massdriver. And then we're going to demonstrate what it would look like to perform ongoing maintenance of a bundle. And for that, we're going to update and modify the bundle that we have to support new capabilities. And then we're going to republish that and show you how that looks. So the ongoing maintenance of IAC once it is turned into a bundle. So let's get started. We're going to basically be spending the rest of the time in a terminal. So you're going to want to open up a terminal. I've already navigated to the directory of the webinar. If you remember, I linked a GitHub repo with the webinar. And in fact, I believe I have it right here. Right here. So this is the repo, excuse me, that I have downloaded. So you should clone that locally if you're going to be following along so that you have the materials that we have. I have already cloned it, and I'm sitting in the directory right here. I also already have Tofu installed. So if I run Tofu version, you'll see I already have version 1.8.2 installed locally. So that's what we'll be using. And I believe that is the version that Massdriver executes as well if you're running OpenTofu. It is version 1.8.2. So that's first things first. Let's cd into the modules S3 bucket directory. And I'm going to open this up in VS Code. I already have VS Code open. This is for the whole webinar repo. But if I open up the S3 bucket directory, you'll see there's 4 files in here. There's a main.tf, and this is, you can see, a very basic module. We're only creating one resource. It's just an S3 bucket. If this was a real S3 module, we should actually have a lot of other things here with it. For those who aren't aware, AWS kind of broke out a lot of the management of S3 buckets into like numerous resources. So you generally need more than just the bucket, but it really doesn't matter for the purposes of this demo. You could be managing 100 resources or a single resource. It's the same process that we're going to be going through. And so this is just a very basic example. So if we also look, we have 2 variables, the bucket name and the region. The bucket name gets used by the actual resource itself right here. The region actually gets used by the provider. We set the provider region right here. And we also have a single output here where we're just outputting the bucket on. So let's first make sure that this is actually a functioning, working Tofu, OpenTofu module. For that, let me actually set my AWS environment here real quick, sandbox. And then we'll do tofu init. This is going to download the providers and just initialize the repo. There we go. Successfully initialized. So now we can run a tofu plant. And this looks good. It just wants to go out and create the bucket. We'll do a tofu apply to make sure that it is actually a working config. Yes. And there we go. It's going to create the bucket, and it gave us back the bucket arm. So you can see this is a working, albeit very simple, OpenTofu module. Now, if you're running this locally and you actually get an error here, it's very likely going to be on the actual bucket name. So something to keep in mind is S3. S3 bucket names are in a global namespace, so they need to be globally unique, right? And so since I'm naming the bucket webinar migrating OpenTofu to Massdriver, if that bucket exists, you guys can't name it the same thing. So you can just modify the bucket name either by creating a parameters file, a variables file to inject, or you can just modify the default value right here. We didn't have to specify because it's set to a default. So you can modify this default if you wanted to, or just create a TFRs file to change it if you run into any issues there. All right, let's clean this up because we don't want that bucket sitting around. We want to actually go, and the next thing we're going to do is publish this to Massdriver and deploy it through Massdriver. So let's run a tofu destroy to get rid of it. Yes. And there we go. The bucket is gone. All right, the next thing that we're going to do is take this OpenTofu module and we're going to turn it into a Massdriver bundle. So you might be asking, well, what is a Massdriver bundle? How is it different than IAC? Think of a bundle as just a wrapper around IAC. Inside every bundle is going to be IAC. And this wrapper is kind of IAC agnostic. It needs to know what the IAC is, but the wrapper itself is agnostic. Again, like I said, we support Terraform, OpenTofu, Helm, Bicep, many of the common IAC tools. This wrapper is going to make it so that even within the Massdriver platform, you can interact with these bundles, and you don't really have to care what the underlying IAC is. To the user, it's completely gone, or it's completely missing. So let's make a new bundle. I'm sorry, what is going on here with my Slack? Give me 1 second here. There we go. Okay, that's CD up to directories. We want to get out of this module. We're going to make the bundle at this top level. Let's clear this out as well. And we're going to run mass bundle new. Now, this is where you're going to need to have the Massdriver CLI installed locally, and you're going to need it set up with your org ID and your an API key, which again, all of that can be found in the docs if you go to docs.massdriver.cloud. So let's run mass bundle new. And this is going to walk us through now the process of actually creating a new bundle. So we're going to call this webinar S3 bucket, something like that. You don't have to name it that. That's what we're going to name it here, though, and say this is a bucket for the webinar. For the template, we're going to use OpenTofu module. There also is a Terraform module if that's what you prefer. Everything is going to be the same in terms of how we manage it going forward. You would just want to be using Terraform locally for your stuff. So let's go OpenTofu module. This is a recent feature that we added where we can then scan an existing repo, an existing module, and import some of the configuration that we're going to need for it. So let's point it to the module that we were just in. So it's in the modules S3 bucket directory. We'll point it there. Now it's going to ask about any connections that we need. Connections are going to be dependencies. The only thing we really need here is we need credentials to be able to authenticate to AWS. And so that's going to be an AWS, let's see, an IAM role. There it is right there. That's the only thing that we need. So we'll hit enter. We're going to need to name this IAM role. Let's name it AWS authentication. That's the standard name that we use in all of our bundles. You can name it something else if you want. You'll just have to modify the configuration a little bit. Output directory, the default is Massdriver. I'm going to drop it into bundle. Again, you can drop it into whatever you would like to name it. Okay, so now if I do an ls, you see we have a bundle directory that's going to have all of those resources in it from mass bundle new. If we open this up, if I minimize this, you'll see we have these files. Specifically, there's this massdriver.yaml that was generated. And by scanning the IAC, when we pointed it to the existing Terraform, OpenTofu module, we were able to scrape these two, what we call parameters. Parameters are just inputs, which in Terraform, that's going to be your variables. And so we were able to identify these two variables, the region and the bucket name. And so we're already able to fill this out with defaults and descriptions and everything. So if we look in the source directory, you'll see that we also were able to import the actual Terraform. So this is the providers file from the module. This is the outputs file from the module. This is the main.tf from the module. and this is the variables file from the module. There's a couple new files here that just come with the template that you can take or leave. There's this artifacts. We won't be discussing artifacts in this webinar, but artifacts are kind of like outputs, but they're generic outputs. So, OpenTofu has the concept of outputs, but that only really works between OpenTofu modules. Artifacts are, just like Massdriver, are IAC agnostic. It's your ability to create a structured output that you can then pass to another bundle that may or may not be running OpenTofu, and maybe running Terraform, maybe running Helm, whatever. We're not going to be making an artifact this time, so we're just going to delete that file. We don't need it. This provider's file is there in case you need it, but we already have a provider's file. The one thing that we do need to copy over is this credential section from the AWS provider. It's just this block right here that has the assume role, and the default tags are nice. So we'll take the default tags over as well. We will copy that, and let's go into the provider's file, and let's just drop it right in here, and we'll remove the comments. Let's format this as well. There we go. That looks a little better. So now we've set this up to be able to use the IAM role that we just passed to it, right? It's going to pull the role arm and the external ID out from the IAM role that's coming in as AWS authentication. That's the connection that we added. And this is really all we have to do. We should get rid of that old provider so we don't double declare things. And this is now ready to deploy. You may be wondering what this validations.json is. This is to allow you to specify certain resources that you don't want to ever be accidentally deleted. So we'll actually update this right now. If we look at the main.tf, you don't have to do this, by the way. But let's say that we don't ever want the S3 bucket to ever get destroyed, accidentally on a deploy. Obviously, on a decommission, it can be destroyed. But on a apply, we don't ever want it to be destroyed. And so in that case, we can take this and we can actually add it to the validations.json. We can just add it right in here. It would be this resource right here. We could say the AWS S3 bucket, don't ever delete that. That's just a nice little feature of Massdriver, but that's not necessary to do. Okay, this is actually ready to publish now. So if we go back into our terminal, if we cd into the bundle directory, we can run mass bundle publish, and it is going to publish this new bundle to our bundle registry in our account. And so let's jump into massdriver.cloud, and let's attempt to publish this bundle. I have it available right here. All right, let's open the bundle. The bundle sidebar, and then search for a webinar. There it is, webinar S3 bucket. This is the one that we just published. I'll drag it onto the canvas, and I'll just name it bucket. And if we go into configure it, you'll see we actually have all of the, or both of the variables that were defined previously, or were defined in the params are right here. These end up being the exact configuration that goes into the OpenTofu when we deploy it. And so these are both fine. Again, we destroyed the bucket previously, so we can reuse this name since the bucket doesn't exist anymore. And we're going to deploy. Something else that's pretty cool that you're going to see here is we just recently, last week, added provisioner logs here. Previously, we would kind of parse the logs and we would just send back important events. But one of the things that we received in feedback was people wanted to actually see the provisioner logs as it was running. And so it's kind of in beta right now, but you'll see hopefully here and momentarily that the actual provisioner logs are going to be coming back, and we'll see OpenTofu actually running. There is a little bit of latency that we need to work on, but hopefully here in a few seconds, we'll see the logs come through. If not, we'll just keep going. and you'll see it. We're going to be deploying and tearing this thing down multiple times. And so if you don't see it here, you'll see it in one of the future ones. Part of the problem here is we're deploying exactly one resource, so it finishes pretty quickly. All right, we'll just keep going. I promise you're going to see the logs show up in one of the next ones. So this actually provisioned successfully. We know that because it went to completed, and the status here is provisioned. This was just to demonstrate how you can publish and now manage this this bundle. The other cool thing is this is a very easy user interface for anybody, not just an operator, not just somebody who writes OpenTofu for your developers. You can you can customize this user interface to only expose the configuration that your developers, would need to know and need to configure. And now you actually have a portable, repeatable IAC bundle that can be used by anybody whenever. And that's really one of the main benefits of managing your IAC through Massdriver. Okay, let's tear this down. Since it has been deployed, we're going to decommission it because we want to deploy it locally. In fact, you may be able to see the logs here when we decommission it. What we want to do next is instead of managing it here in Massdriver, what we're going to do is we're going to deploy it locally. We're going to have local state, and then we're going to migrate the local state into Massdriver so that you can see what it would be like if you already have existing IAC that you're managing and you already have state, but you want to start managing your state through Massdriver. We're going to show you what that would look like. So once this is decommissioned, we'll go back into the console and we're going to deploy it locally. All right, so we're fully decommissioned. Let's head back into the console right here. And let's CD back into the modules S3 bucket. Okay, so we've already deployed this previously. We're going to deploy it again just so we can get some local state. So we've already done a tofu knit. Let's do tofu apply. Yes. There it is. And you should see we have a Terraform.tf state, which is exactly what we want. That is what we're going to use now for actually migrating into Massdriver. So I'm going to link a document or put a docs link in here real quick. You should head to that guide if you want more information on managing Terraform or OpenTofu state through Massdriver. We're actually really excited about this. This is a new feature. Well, to be clear, previously we've managed state. Since Massdriver was created, we've always managed state for you. But what we haven't done is exposed an HTTP endpoint, an API endpoint for you to be able to manage your state locally. And so your ability to migrate your state on or off of Massdriver, you had to do that through us. And now using your service account token and the Massdriver CLI, you're now able to manage your state locally. So you can make state modifications, state migrations, whatever you want to do. A lot of information at that link if you're interested. We're going to be taking a couple excerpts from those docs, and that's what we're going to be doing locally. Specifically, we're going to be setting 5 environment variables that you need for the HTTP backend. And so there's a section in that doc that's all about the environment variables. So the first thing we're going to do is export. It's the HTTP username. And we're just going to set this equal to the Massdriver org ID. This is assuming that you've already set the Massdriver CLI up locally, so you already have the org ID. Do be aware, and it says that in the document there, this should not be the UUID of your org, and that's commonly what's been used. This needs to be your actual org slug. And so if you need your org slug, you can actually get your org slug from, we're going to be adding it. I believe we're going to be adding it here instead of the UUID or the, for this field. But if you need it, you can actually get it from the URL right here. This Chris SBX is for Chris Sandbox. That is my org slug. And that is what that environment variable is. So just be sure that that's what you're using for the username. For the password, password, I need to spell it right. We're going to use the API key. This is just the service account token. Just like that. Then the last one that we need, well, you need a couple, but they're all the same value. It's TF HTTP address. And this is going to be HTTPS api.massdriver.cloud state. And then this next section is going to be the specific resource that you want to manage the state on. And so this needs to be the package name. So if we jump over into our package here sitting on the canvas, and we go to details, this is the package name minus this the random suffix, the 4-character random suffix. Let's just copy that, and we're going to go into CLI. We're going to paste that in there. We'll delete that random suffix, and the last piece here is going to be the path. Now, since bundles can have multiple steps and therefore multiple directories of IAC, we need to know what the directory is. That's how we are able to manage and specify the state. So if we jump back over into the actual bundle, you see all the IAC is in this source directory. You also see it in the massdriver.yaml, the path where everything is in the source directory. So we're going to use the source for that, src. Just like that, put the end parentheses on. There we go. That's the address. The last two things we need the lock address and the unlock address, but those are the exact same values. So we can just set it to the same thing. If we do TF HTTP lock address, we can just set that equal to the TF HTTP address that we just had there, just like that. And same thing with the unlock address. Perfect. So we have the 5 variables that we need set now. So we're in good shape. The last thing that we need to do is we need to update our module, our local module, to say that we want to use HTTP state as the backend. And the reason we need to do this is to tell OpenTofu to start to change where we're managing state. So if you look in the providers.tf file, you'll see it's commented out right now. If there's no backend declaration, OpenTofu just defaults to managing your state locally. And so that's what's happened. That's what's in this TF state right here. We want to move this, though, into Massdriver. And so we're going to go into providers. We're going to uncomment this HTTP. We don't have to configure it at all because we're using the environment variables to do all the configuration. Just make sure that you save. And if we go back into the console, if we do tofu init, hopefully what we'll see here is going to check the back end. It's going to see that there's a new back end now. And it can tell previously that it was local state. Now it's saying, hey, you've changed where the state is. Do you want to migrate the state there? And we're going to say yes. And that's it. It's configured the HTTP state. It's automatically migrated the state over. So we're done. The state has now been migrated, and we've already made a bundle out of this. So we can go in now to Massdriver, and if we deploy it here, and hopefully we'll get the provisional logs back this time. If we deploy it here, what we're actually going to see is there actually should be one change, and that is that it's going to add labels on. Because if you remember, we specified in the AWS provider to actually set some default tags. So it should set the tags, but it shouldn't create the bucket anymore because the bucket already exists. And so hopefully the logs come through. What we'll see is it will be 0 to add and 1 to change, and the change will simply be adding tags onto the resource. Let's cross our fingers here. provision. I'm going to leave this up just for a little bit to hopefully show that the logs come through. I should have thrown a sleep in there to give it a little bit more time for the logs to show up. All right, unfortunately, I don't think they're going to come through. I think it's because it's already completing, and so it's not showing the log since it's already completed. But I can tell you, if we were to deploy the bucket locally and we deployed it through here, there would be a naming collision because it's named the exact same thing. And so that naming collision would have actually prevented it from being deployed if the state wasn't migrated. So that worked. So that kind of shows you what it looks like to be able to take local IAC and local state and migrate it into Massdriver. The last thing that we're going to go over here is, let's say that now you want to be able to update and continue to modify your IAC. Usually IAC is a living document, and so it constantly needs to be changed. And so let's go into our terminal. Let's go back up to the actual bundle itself. And let's open it up in VS Code, and let's make a modification to it. So we can close down the S3 bucket or the module. Let's go into the Terraform, or sorry, the OpenTofu of the bundle itself. So if we look at the main.tf, there's this one variable here that we're hard coding, which, to be clear, I think there's nothing wrong with hard coding variables. In fact, the more you can hard code variables, the better. Just having an S3 bucket module, I don't think is a great practice. S3 is one of the most dynamic resources and services in AWS. You can use it to store logs. You can use it as a data lake and a data warehouse. You can query with Athena. You can use it as asset storage for applications, for like large scale videos and stuff like that. You can use it for AI training, as a data warehouse. You can use it as a bucket for CloudFront S3. You can host a website out of it. All of those different use cases for S3 have very different configuration options. And so if you just have a module for S3, the problem is you need to expose all those different variations of configuration, or all those different variables that need to be configured to specify the use case. I think it's much better, instead of having a single S3 bucket module that can do all of those things, to have 5 S3 bucket modules that are just each of those specific use cases. Having a S3 data lake module, having a S3 CloudFront distribution module, having a S3 object upload. If you mint tokens for people to publish to it, whatever the different use cases are, I suggest you make modules for that use case, and you narrow the configuration down to exactly what should be configurable about that use case. And maybe nothing's configurable about it. Maybe the only thing configurable is the region, things like that. So just my 2 cents on how you should be designing your IAC modules. So let's say in this case, we want to be able to configure this force destroy. We don't want it hard-coded to false. Let's say that we want this to be variabilized, because perhaps in staging, it's fine to leave force destroy to true, but in production, we want force destroy to be false. So instead of hard-coding false, let's make this var.force destroy, just like that. And obviously, the linter doesn't like this because we haven't declared this variable. So let's jump over into variables, and let's add that variable declaration. Variable force destroy, and luckily, there we go. GitHub Copilot takes care of the rest for us. It is a bool. The default is false, and that's a fairly accurate description. Now, in order to expose this in Massdriver, this actually needs to be in the Massdriver.yaml. This Massdriver.yaml is what gets exposed in that sidebar as being configurable. So generally speaking, you want a one-to-one between the Massdriver.yaml and the and your actual IAC. Now, there may be some IAC variables that you don't want to expose. That's fine. You can remove them from the params, but in this case, you want them there. I should also specify that connections also get turned into variables as inputs. And you'll actually see that if we look at this Massdriver variables, this is where we have the structured input for AWS IAM role. This is what it looks like to come in. We also have this metadata variable that comes in that you can use or not use. This is where we're getting the default tags from. This just comes by default whenever you deploy anything through Massdriver. We set this MD metadata, which has a lot of very useful things, and you can use it or ignore it. It's completely up to you. But to come back to this variable now, normally, previously, in order to use this, we would now need to go and update the massdriver.yaml to have this thing. But I am excited to announce there's actually another new feature that isn't even released yet. It'll get released later this week, but I'm going to show you the functionality here now because I have a local internal build of our CLI. So first, I'm actually going to lint. This lint isn't the new thing. If I do a mass bundle lint, this has existed for a long time. This is going to identify actually that issue that we just talked about. It's saying, hey, the IAC variable force destroy is declared in the provisioner in OpenTofu, but is missing from the massdriver.yaml. So luckily, if you use mass bundle lint, it should help you find a lot of these sorts of things. The new feature is mass bundle import. Again, if you have the current version of the CLI, this won't be in it. We're going to be releasing it later this week. So take a look later this week for a new version of the CLI, and it'll be there. If we run that, it will identify that this force destroy variable hasn't been imported, and it will ask us if we want to. And if we say yes, then it's going to import it into the massdriver.yaml automatically for us. So if we now jump back over into VS Code and we look at massdriver.yaml, it should be, it's because it has changes. No, don't say it. If I open it, there we go. It's because I had unsaved changes. So there we go. It has added force destroy, is also marked as required. So we've imported that. Now we can just publish it, and it will be available in Massdriver. Bundle publish. Perfect, just like that. Let's jump into Massdriver and let's redeploy it. And let's hope we get the log. Actually, so let me refresh this. And let's hope we get the logs this time. You can see we notify you there's a new version available. That means we published but haven't deployed yet. Let's deploy it. You'll also see force destroy was right there. So we could change this if we wanted to update it. But now it's exposed and it's available for people to be able to change and modify. Let's open this up and let's hope with this last one we can demonstrate the logs. We are going to be working to reduce the latency on this so that it's more real time. The last thing that I'll mention is the really cool thing about that import is what I tried. There we go. Now we got the logs coming back through. And you'll see no changes necessary because it was already set to false. And so apply complete with 0 added, 0 changed, 0 destroyed. That's what we like to see. And you'll also see this also demonstrates that the state was properly migrated here. So everything's good. The thing I want to talk about is we were able to just modify the OpenTofu and then use the CLI to kind of make all of the Massdriver specific changes. So you don't really need now even to dig into and manipulate and tweak the Massdriver.yaml. You can update the description. You can add, some validation around variable input and things like that if you want to. But to make it as easy as possible, you can focus on just what you know, which is managing OpenTofu and modifying OpenTofu. And you can use the CLI to import any of the changes you've made to your IAC into Massdriver. So very cool feature. We're really excited about that. Again, watch the CLI and you should see an update later this week that has that import in it. So that actually concludes this webinar. So if we jump into the recap, let's talk about what we just did here. So we took a very basic OpenTofu module. We converted it into a Massdriver bundle, which we then published and we deployed and we destroyed in Massdriver. We then, after destroying it, we went locally and we deployed it locally so that it already existed and we had state. And we migrated that state into Massdriver for that specific package that we wanted to deploy from. We then jumped into Massdriver, we deployed it, and we saw that it worked. And the last thing that we did is then we began doing all of our maintenance to the IAC through the bundle itself. We modified the OpenTofu. We added a new variable. We updated the resource configuration from it. We imported those changes, republished, and we're able to continue managing and deploying the resource through Massdriver. So that kind of shows you a full end-to-end workflow of taking existing OpenTofu, bringing it into Massdriver, and managing it exclusively through Massdriver going forward. So that actually concludes our webinar. Thank you for joining. I will be sticking around to answer some questions. So if you guys have any questions, feel free to ask them in chat. And if you're interested in learning any more about Massdriver, please check out massdriver.cloud. There's a link right there on the slide. And if you have any questions specific to me, you can email me right there at chris.massdriver.cloud. Thanks everybody for coming.